Hey students, how is everybody doing? I'm back to make another civil rights video. Today this evening we're going to talk about the women's liberation movement, okay, or the women's movement or the feminist movement. But remember, a lot of women uh, before they got the right to vote were suffragists. They just wanted the right to vote. They were okay with all the other duties of women. The women's movement is actually split up into two parts uh, prior to 1921 and then after 1921. And we start off with Margaret Sanger. And she's actually a very misunderstood woman in the feminist movement because she did have some pretty draconian um, ideas about sterilization and stuff like that. But believe it or not, she starts the American Birth Control League in 1921 that is eventually going to become Planned Parenthood in 1942. And Planned Parenthood has been a huge resource for women all over the United States. Believe me, there are some women that would not be able to get any feminine, routine feminine checkups without uh, Planned Parenthood. I had a brain fart there for a minute. In 1935, Mary McLeod Bethune organizes the National Council of Negro Women, a coalition of African American women that lobbies against job discrimination, racism, and sexism. So, you know, that we see progress in women slowly. Now, as I've told you this before, the reason that women are held back so much at that time, in contemporary, that time was the absence of an oral contraceptive. Uh, with the invention of an oral contraceptive, I think it is approved by the FDA in the United States in 1960, and in 1963, an OBID comes out, end ovulation, and an OBID comes out, and for the first time in their lives, women have control of their life, and that's what an oral contraceptive does. An oral contraceptive just puts a barrier between the sperm and the egg, and then women can go off and go to school and get a degree to practice what they want to practice, and not get a degree, and not get an MRS degree. You know, a lot of women in the 1950s and 60s that went to college, they graduated from college and they never practiced what they did. They just had one baby after another, after another, after another, until they went through menopause. And it was a horrible, horrible life for women at that time. Created a lot of problems, you know. Now remember, we had Comstock laws. You know, the federal law, Comstock laws, prohibits the dissemination of contraceptives through the mail or any form of birth control. You know, some of these things, they while they weren't considered as classified as obscene, they were still not. It was not okay, and that's one of the things that Margaret Sanger wants to do. Now, Margaret Sanger did come from a very large family, so she completely understood what poverty was. And her with Miss McCormick, and I cannot remember the guy's name now to save my life. Uh, they fund him to come up with the birth control pill, and we have the rise of Enovid, and I will remember his name in a little bit. Okay. Now, of course, we talked about, you know, in 1955 we have the first lesbian organization, the Daughters of Bilitis, and like I said, progress for women is very slow. Why? They gotta stay home and take care of kids. You know, um, 1950s and early 1960s, you don't see women in the professional world because, you know, a woman's a nurse or a woman's an attorney. What if she gets pregnant during the big case? You know, they didn't want to take that risk, you know, so a lot of women did not. And when they did get hired, they got hired, you know, 50 cents on the dollar compared to men. 75, I think that women are up to what, 75, 80 cents on the dollar or something like that, some really ridiculous amount. Uh, Now, we are going to have people like FDR that's going to appoint Francis Perkins to his cabinet. And we are going to have Eleanor Roosevelt that's going to campaign for women. And After FDR has passed away, John F. Kennedy establishes a President's Committee and appoints Eleanor Roosevelt as a chairwoman. And what they looked at between 61 and 63 is that they looked at discrimination against women in the workplace. Now, I remember when my mom, in the 1970s, when my mom had to go work at the bank and she had to wear like this business attire. I remember the bank that she worked at had like marble floors, and they used to have to wear heels, and their uniforms would cost them, a couple of $1,000s, in the end. And that's just wrong. The whole idea of having to look a certain way wasn't something that's not real. That's not very fair. If you go to banks now, it's a lot more casual. Okay. The other thing that they begin talking about in the 1960s is affordable childcare. If we're going to go to work, until we can take our children can go to school, we need some sort of affordable childcare. Now, we are going to have in the Great Society, we're going to have Head Start, and by the way, you have to watch that video on the Great Society that I have there too, because you're going to have Head Start. You're going to have under LBJ, you're going to have PBS, and instead of the baby staying with grandmother and watching novelas, telenovelas, and, the then equivalent of, game shows and stuff, they would watch Sesame Street. You have no idea how many children grew up with Sesame Street or Zoom or any of those programs that enrich children in getting them ready and to go. Head Start was a great program. I think we should expand on it. You go to work, you drop off your kid at Head Start. I think the only requirement for Head Start is that your child be potty trained. So you're looking at 2 years old for young ladies. For male kids, sometimes it's a little later. But the whole idea is to give women more freedom and be able to pursue their own professional career. Now, in 1963, Betty Friedan publishes her highly influential book, and she recently passed away about 5 years ago, The Feminine Mystique, and it describes the dissatisfaction that's felt among middle-class women as being housewives. I actually think that being a housewife is like a sort of domestic slavery. We are now in a pandemic. We are in a lockdown. And, every time I turn around, the sink is full of dishes. Or, you finish mopping and, the cat throws up or something like that. I mean, there's got to be a way out for women. And that the book, The Feminine Mystique, galvanizes. It says what a lot of women in modern America coming out of the nuclear age, of the nuclear family, say what you want to do. We don't want to live this way. We don't want to, we don't want to have as many children to have a baseball team. You know what I mean? I don't want to do that. I want to have 1 or 2 or 3 kids. And, back then they had, instead of low-rise, they had hip huggers and miniskirts, and women wanted to do those things instead of just, slowly watching their life drift away in perpetual motherhood. In 1964, we have Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, and it bars discrimination in employment on the basis of race and sex. And it also establishes the EEOC. Okay, now, the EEOC is really good, all right? This is where sexual harassment or, hostile working place and all of that comes in. So we are beginning to move forward in this idea that you can't make one advertisement for men and one advertisement for women. I actually wish that when you submitted an application, you were given a random number and nobody knew what your gender was. All you're looking at is your qualifications and stuff. And I've told many of my students, I honestly believe that women are more intelligent than men. I've always said that. I'm not ashamed to say that at all. In 1965, we have Griswold v. Connecticut, and that's really good because that actually, the last that prohibits the use of contraceptives by married couples. So if you were married, you could use contraceptives. If you weren't married, you couldn't use contraceptives. You'd get busted, and so what? In 66, we have the National Organization for Women now, and that is founded by Betty Friedan. Excuse me there, I had to take a drink. And now seeks the end of sexual discrimination, especially in the workplace. And that's what I think that my mother and many of her friends at that time were exposed to, you know, that they had to dress a certain way, that they had to act a certain way in front of men, that they could, you know, if you watch the series Mad Men, you know, that is, you know, you should not have to put up with sexual discrimination in the work. Now, it goes both ways. You know, women can sexually discriminate against men, and men can discriminate against women sexually. But, you know, I've heard horrible cases of, you know, businessmen putting their coffee machines right in front of their desk, a little lower, so their secretaries had to stoop down and get it, you know, and that just, it's nonsense, okay? So they start lobbying on that. Now, of course, you know, men would say that these women were frustrated and that they just didn't know love and all of the above. No, they just wanted to be treated equally. Now, in 67, Executive Order 11375 expands the Lyndon Johnson's power of presidency and affirmative action. And it says there that as a result, federal agencies and contractors must take active measures to ensure that women, as well as all minorities, enjoy the same educational and employment opportunities as white males. Okay, so that again is important. That it doesn't matter what your gender is, you should enjoy what white males enjoy, and that's the key word there, white males, because in 67, trust me, brown people and black people weren't treated much better than women. In 68, the EEOC says that segregated ads, that's the one I was telling you, I jumped to, and it is challenged by the Supreme Court, and it says, yeah, now women can apply for higher paying jobs. In other words, before women sometimes couldn't apply for being an attorney or for being a baseball coach or you name it. And I think this year, 2020, don't we have the first female NFL coach? You know, that's groundbreaking, you know, and she should be just as capable as anybody else, you know. Remember, a lot of times women at this time when they got divorced, they had to give a reason why they were divorced. California comes up with a no fault. That can easily be said by irreconcilable differences. You don't no longer have to prove that somebody was at fault or somebody committed adultery. You just go, hey, you know what? We can't solve our differences, that is. And all states handle property rights differently. In Texas, believe it or not, they tend to favor women to an extent, okay? Property that a woman comes into the marriage with remains hers. Any property that they acquire after the marriage is split 50-50. I'm pretty sure that it's still like that. And that's due to Spanish law, and it is actually based on Muslim law, okay? Schultz versus Wheaton Glass Company appeals that jobs held by men and women must be substantially equal, but not identical. You see, and as long as they put that kind of verbiage in there, it's not really going to allow women to have equal pay, because they could say, well, you know what? We're not paying you as much, but you're also not working as much. Well, I have a problem with that. You know, pay them the same. Get over it. Be done with it. 1970, remember, we have a bunch of magazines in the 1950s like McCall's and I forget some of the other ones. I'm pretty sure I know them. I just forgot right now. They start with MS magazine instead of MRS. And that the politically correct to say it right now, and the way you should, is that it's MS. You know, a lot of women now have hyphenated names. My wife doesn't even have a hyphenated name. She kept her name. I'm pretty sure my dad is flipping in his grave right now. But my wife doesn't belong to me. You know, it is her choice to do that. The magazine, Miss Magazine, becomes a forum for feminist voices. Okay, and Jorda Stein, I always say the name wrong. Steinem launches the icon of the modern feminist movement. Okay, now in March of 22, 22nd of 1972. The Equal Rights Amendment is passed by Congress, but unfortunately, the amendment dies in 1982 when it failed to achieve ratification by a minimum of 38 states. Texas voted against it. The equality of rights under law shall not be denied or abridged in the United States or by any state on the account of sex. And it's not ratified now. Again, in 72, we have Eisenstadt and Baird. The Supreme Court rules the right to privacy, which is going to be similar to birth control, is that includes unmarried persons can use birth control. It's your right. And remember, with birth control, the way that it is written is that is it going to produce an undue burden on the female? And the government says that we cannot ask the female if it is an undue burden because that is her right to privacy. So if she feels that her pregnancy is going to cause an undue burden, then she can have a termination. Okay, end of story. And I believe that in this case, men should not have a voice in it because ultimately they're not going to carry the baby to term, and that's just the way that I feel. I mean, again, these views are mine and not those of the institution that I work for, but that's the way I feel about it. Now, Title IX of Education, and this one is really good. It says it bans sexual discrimination in schools, and no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, excluded from participation and denied the benefits of subject to discrimination in any educational program that is actively receiving federal funding. So if you're going to have a men's football team, you've got to have the money allocated for a female football team. You have a men's track team, you have a women's track team. If you don't have the money to do that, then females can play football or females can play in a male baseball team. And what happens really in Texas University of Texas at Austin has the first women's track team. And if you look them up, they have wearing this bouffant hair, hairdos, and they're running track. It's really amazing that they do that. Now, as a result of Title IX, you have a big increasement dramatically for women. Now they can, they can get scholarships. It's upward mobility. Okay. Now in 73, as I said, Roe v. Wade, Supreme Court establishes that a woman's right to safe and legal abortion overrides anti-abortions in many states. And this, again, is the undue burden and a right to privacy. At least that's the way it was explained to me by an attorney, Professor Tovanche. 74, we begin to have the deal about the going rate and wages under Corning Glassworks and Brennan. And let me read this one because I get them mixed up. Rules that employees cannot justify paying women lower wages because they traditionally received under the going market rate. So because traditionally women didn't make that much kind of money, doesn't mean that you don't have to pay them now, okay? Nebraska 76, the first state to enact a marital rape. Before, women were going to have sex when it was ordered of them, whether they wanted to and whether they liked it or not. Now, it's no means no, and that's the way it should be. And in 78, we have the Pregnancy Discrimination Act. That means that if a woman is denied promotion based on the fact that she is pregnant, then that's discrimination. My wife was discriminated upon by two University of Texas at Arlington professors. One who I cannot remember his name, and the other one who is Timothy Grammer, and I don't have a problem saying it. My wife went into labor, and they both gave her Fs because she missed the finals. She was in labor. She was able to file a grade appeal. She was encouraged by members of the school to file suit that told her that she had a very good case, and she chose not to. To this day, I kind of regret that she didn't because, baby came and she was doing really good in the classes, and they just gave her an F. I would never do that. I mean, come on. I mean, I know that you know that you're pregnant when you get in the class, but, we'll make a dispensation there, It wasn't like she was a loser or something like that. there seems to be a lot going on outside. Now, that's 1979. From 1980 to the present, we are going to have, like, we're going to have a lot of Supreme Court cases. Like in 1992, reaffirms the validity of women's right to an abortion under Roe v. Wade. In 1994, we have the Violence Against Women Act that tightens federal penalties for sex offenders and domestic violence, which is a big problem. In 1996, United States v. Virginia, an all-male Virginia military school, VMI, has to admit women in order to get funding. So we're seeing this, now I can sit here and just give you more and more and more cases, and they're just going to kind of be mind-boggling. But the idea is that most of these cases have to do with discrimination in the workplace or discrimination in when it comes to not sexuality but birthrights. Okay, in 2006, Supreme Court upholds the ban on partial birth abortion. 5-4, which upholds, I'm going to read this so I don't get it wrong, upholds that partial birth abortion ban, federally passed in 2003. It's a specific ban and specific type of abortion procedure. Of course, the notorious Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who dissents, said, so at odds is our jurisprudence that it would not be staying in power. Anthony Kennedy said the act of expresses respect for the dignity of human life. So a lot of these are really, dense cases. You have to look at them, maybe write a paper in English or something. 2009, Barack Obama signs the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Restoration Act. I don't know what's happened since then. And of course, in 2003, Leon Panetta announces that, the ban on women serving in combat is going to be lifted. Let's see what else I have in my notes. In 2016, Supreme Court decides that Texas law imposed on abortion clinics is unconstitutional, and I believe it is. And 2017, under the Trump administration, Trump in a leaked video, of course, we're not going to get into that, right? So basically, this is the women's rights aspect of it. Like I said, I left a lot. Didn't talk about Susan B. and Wells. I mean, there's just a lot going on, but it's in little spaces. But remember, once women have an oral contraceptive, that really liberates them. I know that a lot of you don't believe this, but, once there's a barrier between, the egg and the sperm, then women can choose what they want to do, and they can postpone their pregnancy while they're at it. I mean, I have a daughter that is in her early 30s, and, she's got her guy friend, and she's pursuing her career. I have a son that's almost 30, and his girlfriend feels the same way. So that's the only thing that we're saying, that women should have control of what they earn, and they should have control over their physiology, and not a bunch of men like myself telling them what to do, because at the end of the day, we men are not real dependable. So anyway, you all take care. Maybe tonight I'll go ahead and do one on the Native American Indian movement, which is rather short, but maybe I'll combine it with 1968, and we'll be done. Okay? Make sure you watch the Great Society video, okay? Because if you don't, you're going to miss a bunch of questions on the exam. Take care. Be kind to each other.